Do you see any of the real Diana in Meghan? Did
God,
you?
no.
Really?
No. Oh, sorry.
Piers Morgan leans forward, lifts a stack of glossy photographs, and in that quiet beat before he speaks, you can feel the air in the studio change. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't play to the cameras. He simply holds the images like a prosecutor presenting evidence. And the story the world has been fed for years begins to crack. For a long time, Meghan Markle has cultivated a very specific public identity. The struggling actress, the overlooked outsider, the woman journaling about empowerment while navigating a brutal industry on her own terms. It's a narrative repeated so often it became almost untouchable. But the photos on that screen didn't look like struggle. They didn't suggest scraping by. They looked like access. Private members' clubs. Invitation-only gatherings. Circles so exclusive that even established celebrities get turned away. And there was Meghan not lingering at the edges, not tagging along with someone more connected. Positioned comfortably at the center. The settings, the company, the body language, none of it felt accidental. As the images flashed across the screen, even Piers' co-hosts seemed uncertain what they were witnessing. Journalism? Retribution? Or something more calculated than either? That's when the internet caught fire. Clips spread before the broadcast finished airing. Hashtags formed in real time. But people weren't just reacting to the photographs themselves. They were reacting to the implications. If Meghan truly lived modestly, if she genuinely struggled the way she's always claimed, then how did she move so effortlessly through spaces designed for the ultra-connected? Who funded the travel, the wardrobes, the memberships? These weren't accusations invented from nothing. They were questions sparked by visuals that didn't match the official story. And here's the detail that made people lean closer rather than scroll away. Her legal team, famously aggressive, notoriously quick to respond, said nothing. No statement. No rebuttal. No sources close to Meghan pushing back. Just silence. And when someone who treats media battles like a combat sport suddenly refuses to engage, people notice. Piers framed the moment not as an attack, but as a correction. Setting the record straight. That phrase landed harder than any insult could have. Because if those photographs were authentic, if they connected to moments Meghan has never publicly acknowledged, then her carefully constructed narrative wasn't just incomplete. It may have been engineered from the start. But to understand why this moment carried such weight, you have to understand the history behind it. Long before Meghan became a duchess, long before the royal exit, the Netflix deals, and the global headlines, she and Piers Morgan crossed paths in a far more ordinary way. They exchanged messages. They met for drinks at a London pub. By his account, she was charming, warm, and genuinely engaging. For a brief window, there seemed to be a real connection forming. Then she vanished. No explanation. No gradual fade. Just sudden, complete silence. And the timing made it impossible to ignore. Within days of their last contact, Meghan was photographed at Soho House with Prince Harry, stepping into a world that made every previous relationship instantly obsolete. To Piers, it felt like being discarded. To critics watching years later, it looked like something else entirely, a pattern. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. People who once knew Meghan began sharing similar experiences. Friends who found themselves quietly cut off once they were no longer useful. Relationships that ended abruptly when new opportunities appeared. A trail of connections severed without warning or explanation. That personal history matters because it shaped everything that followed. When Meghan sat down with Oprah and presented herself as a victim of cruelty, racism, and institutional neglect, Piers didn't stay quiet. He challenged her claims publicly. He questioned her credibility. And that decision detonated his career. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Tens of thousands of complaints flooded the broadcast regulator, a record-breaking number. When his network gave him a choice between apologizing or resigning, he walked away without hesitation. From his perspective, he wasn't being punished for getting the facts wrong. He was being silenced for refusing to accept a narrative he didn't believe. When reports emerged that Meghan herself had lodged a formal complaint against him, whatever remained professional about their conflict became deeply personal. So when those photographs appeared on live television, it didn't feel like a random leak. It felt like years of pressure finally finding release. But Piers Morgan may not be the most significant figure in how those images surfaced. Because almost immediately, another name started circulating, someone far closer to Meghan's inner world. Marcus Anderson. If you followed Meghan's rise carefully, his presence becomes difficult to ignore. Officially, he's described as a close friend. Unofficially, he operates as something far more valuable. A gatekeeper. As the global membership director of Soho House, Marcus doesn't just know connected people. He decides who gets access, who enters the private rooms, and who gets remembered. What caught people's attention wasn't the friendship itself. It was the pattern. Wherever Meghan's life pivoted, Toronto, London, Los Angeles, Marcus seemed to already be positioned nearby. Each transition, each reinvention, his presence appeared in the background. To people familiar with how elite social networks function, this didn't look coincidental. It looked coordinated. With someone like Marcus in your corner, doors don't just open. They stay open. You get introduced to the right people at the right moments. You're positioned in rooms that suggest belonging rather than ambition. For an actress building a specific public image, that kind of strategic placement isn't just helpful. It's transformative. That's why the source of those leaked photographs became such a sensitive question. Many of the images Piers revealed appeared to originate from environments so private, so carefully controlled, that only someone with genuine insider access could have captured them. And that possibility unsettled people more than the photographs themselves, because it suggested the fracture didn't come from outside critics or tabloid enemies. It may have come from within her own carefully guarded circle. As the images spread, another thread resurfaced, one that had lingered in corners of the internet for years without ever breaking into mainstream conversation. The yacht stories. Whispered accounts of ultra-exclusive gatherings on private vessels. Events where business, influence, and social access blurred together in ways that rarely get documented. Investigative writers had previously traced patterns involving young actresses traveling to expensive destinations under vague arrangements. Meghan's name had circulated in those discussions often enough to persist, even when concrete evidence remained elusive. Some photographs connected to these rumors were later debunked by different women, mistaken identities. But enough timelines aligned, enough locations overlapped, and enough anonymous accounts matched closely enough to keep the speculation alive. People began asking uncomfortable questions again. If Meghan genuinely struggled financially during her early career, how did she afford extended stays in Mediterranean hotspots? Who covered the costs? Why did certain faces reappear around her across different countries, faces connected to circles known for brokering influence and access? These weren't necessarily accusations. For many observers, they were simply inconsistencies, gaps in a story that suddenly felt less solid under scrutiny. And before any of this could settle, Prince Harry himself added another layer. When Harry published Spare, the intention was vulnerability, intimacy, a love story told from the inside in his own words. But for critics, the memoir accomplished something unintended. It didn't smooth over the rough edges of Meghan's past. It illuminated them. In casual passages, Harry describes how Meghan treated Soho House less like an occasional meeting spot and more like a second home. He recalls private dinners in hidden corners, discreet rooms away from public view, staff members who already knew her preferences and rhythms. For most couples, details like these would sound romantic. Here they raised questions. Because Meghan had spent years minimizing that connection. She described Soho House as merely a convenient place she rarely used. Yet Harry's own memories painted something different. A woman deeply embedded in that world long before she met him. And once readers noticed that contradiction, they couldn't unsee it. If she wasn't genuinely part of that exclusive ecosystem, how did she navigate it so seamlessly? Who paid for the memberships? How did she secure such privileged access to a club famous for rejecting people far wealthier and more established than she was at the time? Harry wasn't trying to expose anything. He was simply telling his truth. But his sincerity became the problem, because it clashed with the carefully managed narrative Meghan had constructed. The humble outsider. The woman who didn't belong in elite spaces until love brought her there. The contrast became impossible to reconcile. And when readers connected those memoir details to the photographs Piers had revealed, the dissonance sharpened into something that demanded explanation. What followed should have been predictable. A statement. A clarification. even a carefully worded non-denial. This is a woman who has pursued legal action over a private letter, who has responded swiftly to controversies over lighting choices and podcast misunderstandings. Someone whose entire public strategy depends on controlling the narrative. But there was nothing. No acknowledgement. No correction. Not even the standard background briefing to friendly journalists. Just silence. And that silence became its own story. People noticed immediately. If the photographs were fake, why not say so? If they were misleadingly framed, why not explain? Her team had challenged far smaller stories without hesitation. The sudden quiet didn't reassure anyone. It magnified the questions. Some analysts suggested that responding would only legitimize the images. Others believed her team was trapped in an impossible calculation, unsure whether acknowledgement would cause more damage than strategic silence. But ignoring the controversy didn't make it disappear. It gave it room to grow. Social media threads multiplied. Commentators dissected every detail. The absence of a response became the headline. And as observers dug deeper, a broader pattern came into focus. This wasn't one isolated controversy. It was the latest chapter in a longer story of reinvention. Long before royal life, Meghan had already transformed herself multiple times. Old identities quietly retired as new opportunities emerged. Blog posts deleted. Friendships ended. Entire chapters of her life erased when they no longer served the image she wanted to project. She had been a briefcase model on Deal or No Deal. She'd worked the audition circuit for years. She was building a lifestyle brand in Toronto while filming Suits. And throughout, whispers followed her about exclusive trips, about influential connections, about circles that didn't match the narrative of an actress grinding her way toward recognition. People who once knew her described familiar patterns. Closeness that ended abruptly when new doors opened. Former relationships that concluded without warning. The same sudden silence Piers Morgan experienced, repeated across different contexts and different years. Each reinvention arrived with a new story. One about perseverance. One about being overlooked. One about rising above obstacles through sheer determination. But the foundation cracked every time an old photograph resurfaced. Every time a timeline shifted between interviews. Every time her own previous statements contradicted something she was saying now. The Soho House years, more than any other period, refused to stay buried. Because they represented a version of Meghan that contradicted the fairy tale. The exclusivity. The glamour. The access to powerful circles. None of it aligned with the image of an ordinary woman who just happened to fall in love with a prince. That's why these photographs felt different. They weren't embarrassing snapshots or tabloid fodder. They were evidence of editing. And when edits start unraveling, the entire narrative becomes vulnerable. This is why the conversation isn't fading. Every unanswered question, every strategic silence, every gap where a chapter should be, each one generates more curiosity, more scrutiny, more pressure. Piers Morgan may have cracked the door open during a live broadcast, but it's what lies behind that door. The patterns, the contradictions, the carefully removed fragments that keeps people returning, rewinding, and asking what else remains hidden. Whether Meghan eventually addresses these revelations or continues relying on silence, one reality has become unavoidable. The scrutiny isn't decreasing. It's intensifying. Because this story extends beyond leaked photographs and tabloid feuds. It touches something deeper. The tension between public image and private truth. The question of who gets to control their own narrative, and what happens when that control starts slipping. And if you think this ends here, it doesn't. Because the pressure intensifies further when it turns inward toward her own family. The patterns of distance, the severed relationships, the silence where connection should exist. In the next video, Thomas Markle Jr. breaks that silence publicly, confronting Meghan directly about their abandoned father. It's a moment that connects everything you've just witnessed and adds an emotional dimension that changes how this entire story lands. Watch that next. Then decide for yourself whether the past can ever truly be erased.